Welcome everyone to the Western Museum of Flight. I'm Cindy Maka, the director. For today's lecture, we have an authoritative source, a speaker, who in addition to his current position as sector historian, Northrop Grumman Aeronautic Systems, for many years served in the Northrop Engineering Model Shop, creating high-fidelity display and demonstration models of all the aircraft that the company developed. He is also author of Flying Wings and Radical Things, Northrop's secret aerospace projects and concepts. He will now share with us his intimate knowledge of the F-20 from his participation in the program from inception to conclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Tony Chong.
Okay, the first thing I want to do, thank you, Cindy, by the way. First thing I want to do is take a drink of water because I've been talking all morning and I just realized how dry my throat is. So, thank you very much for having me here. One slight correction, I was in the engineering model shop, but it was the display model shop, which we did all what they called the toys. And yeah, it was a lot of fun for a lot of years. And then when I retired in 2014, they brought me back and made me the sector historian, which I've been having a lot of interesting things to do for the last, well, that was 2014, 2015, so about the last 10 years. So, but anyway, let's see if we can move along. Okay, now, you saw Paul talking, if those of you paying attention to the film clip, Paul was talking earlier. This was supposed to be Paul's talk. Of course, he is a former test pilot on the F-20, also the YF-23, author of both the YF-23 book and the F-20 book. Both of them are probably the definitive works on either subject. Paul lives in Texas. He doesn't travel anymore. So I was asked to do the program on his behalf. Now, Paul graciously said, Tony, do the program whichever way you want. And I appreciate that, but I really feel that this is Paul's talk, this is Paul's book, so I'm going to try to do what Paul might have wanted to do, which was give a big picture version of the program. I don't know if Craig's here yet. I would also like to shout out Craig Caston for a lot of the graphics and artwork that he did for the book. It was just an amazing job putting that all together. Okay, the big picture questions. What were the policy decisions and design evolutions that led to the F-20? Number two, how did outside events and the political landscape affect this program? 3, why did the F-20 not win any orders except for from Bahrain for 4 airplanes? All right, so oh, by the way, that is the cover of his book to the right. It is for sale. I encourage people, if you want the nuts and bolts and deep dive stuff on the F-20, please buy the book. I helped. Okay, the F-20 was primarily designed for foreign military sales, also known as FMS. Now, foreign sales were always part of the aviation business. You see the Wright brothers up on the upper left. They showcased their model 1909 Flyer A in Europe, and they were looking for both civil and military contracts. At the same time, they were demoing the airplane to the US military in Virginia. So it was always a big part of it from the very beginning. By the 1930s, foreign military sales were a critical part of many companies' portfolios for their very survival. For instance, the 1932 Northrop Corporation, which was a partially owned subsidiary to the Douglas Aircraft Company, needed foreign military sales when the United States government forbade single-engine transport airplanes from flying within the overpopulated areas within the United States. Well, that ruled out the Northrop Delta. So they turned to militarized versions of their Gamma, which you can see on the upper right, and they sold it to several countries. This particular, the Gamma 8A, was sold to Sweden. Now, the legacy Northrop company, the company that has now Northrop Grumman, their first production airplane was a foreign military sales aircraft. It was the N3PB float plane. And that was to Norway in 1940. Norway fell before it could be delivered, so the N3PB was actually flown with British markings by expatriate Norwegian crews out of Iceland. FMS was very much a part of the design thinking behind the N156, which was the Northrop designation, internal designation for what became the F5 series, T-38 F5. They always had a foreign military sales component as part of that design. Now, the introduction of lightweight engines by Fairchild with the J83, which was later canceled, and especially the General Electric J85, spurred Northrop to pursue the goal of a lightweight, low maintenance, and low cost fighter as an alternative to the big, maintenance heavy, and expensive fighters that the US Air Force was pursuing, which, by the way, Northrop was also bidding on as well. Now, if you look at the design evolution, starting with the upper left, the N156 went through this evolution. First, you started off with podded engines under the wing. That design was thrown out because Welko Gasich in preliminary design realized that they wouldn't make supersonic flight with that configuration. So they went with the T-tail design below it, where the engines were brought embedded in the fuselage, and they had a T-tail. That design was the one that initially got the program started in the sense of generating sales pitches. The problem is that particular design had the T-tail, which caused pitch-up problems, so they rapidly moved to the follow-on design, which was the upper right, which was to bring the horizontals down and then to have a single vertical tail. In this case, it was a swept tail. The final iteration was the trapezoidal tail, which is what was on the T-38 or the N156T and the N156F. That has pretty much remained the configuration for the T-38 F5 series all the way through the F-20. Now, the original N156 was pitched as a fighter for the Jeep carriers, the escort carriers for the Navy. When the Navy decided to do away with the escort carriers, Northrop pivoted. They said, well, there's other Navy programs, there's Air Force programs, there are fighter bomber configurations, there are trainer versions. So the airplane itself pivoted. Despite that, or even because of that, all of the foreign military sales pitches were targeted towards whatever design was going at the moment. So if you look at some of the history of the company, if you see them pitching a foreign sales to Europe, you would have the podded engines, you would have the T-tail, and then you would have the configuration that became the T-38. So they were pitching all of those designs at the same time. Now, as part of the design evolution, weight as a function of cost was the primary driver. The major compromise, according to Welko Gasich, was the wing area. He later remarked that he wanted a larger wing, but the cost target limited them to a wing with 170 square feet. So this design compromise, necessary to get the program won and to maintain the cost that they wanted to project to the Air Force. This compromise impacted all subsequent designs from the T-38 up to the F-20. Although the T-38 did secure an Air Force contract with some eventual FMS attached to it, the N156F, which was the fighter and fighter bomber variant, didn't get any sales for 3 years. And this was despite a heavy marketing effort by the company, especially to NATO. There was all sorts of sales pitches. Nothing clicked. They pitched the idea to the US Army. The Army was looking for a forward FAC, forward air controller, a fast FAC. And they pitched it, and the competitor was Douglas with a version of the A4 Skyhawk, and with the G91R, which was a European aircraft design. Northrop did very well in that, but the Air Force said, no, no, you can't have a fast jet for a fast fac, so that killed that. But it wasn't until the State Department and the Defense Department decided to choose the N-156F as the aircraft of choice for foreign military sales via the new Military Assistance Program called MAP. That's the program that allowed N-156F, later F-5A and F-5B sales to occur. Now, MAP allowed eligible allies and third world non-aligned nations to purchase U.S. military equipment through direct assistance or non-repayable grants. We were basically moving these airplanes out to be a counter to what the Soviet Union was doing with their aircraft, selling it to their allies and to other non-aligned nations. So the N-156F became the single-seat F-5A and the two-seat F-5B, and they were called the Freedom Fighter. And they also had a 170-square-foot wing. Now, many nations used these early F-5s, including Ethiopia, Iran, Libya, Spain, and South Vietnam. Okay, as with any product, once a sale is recorded, every effort is made by the manufacturer to exploit that product with an expanded range of new and improved variations, and the N-156 series was no different. The company produced genealogy chart here shows the various proposed iterations. I'll let you look at it for a little bit. There were all sorts of designs put out. Now, the chart doesn't include the ST-38, which is on the upper right, which was a spaceplane trainer, or the N-156 Zell, which was a zero launch model, on the bottom. All of these designs, except for the T-38 and the N-156F, never saw fruition. But they sure had a catalog that you could pick from. Through it all, Northrop was keenly aware of the wing area compromise and tried several times to grow the wing. These included the proposed N-156C, N-156D, the N-285, the N-286, the N-290, the N-292, and the N-299. Other proposed improvements included enlarged fuselage length and engine upgrades. Now, in one sense, they succeeded. The N-300 was a growth version of the F-5, which led to the P-530 Cobra, which then became the YF-17 lightweight fighter, which became the F-A-18 Hornet, Super Hornet, and EA-18G Growler. But that's a story for another day. Just as a note, the wing area on the YF-17 was 350 square feet. That gives you an idea of the difference in size. With the fielding of advanced Soviet-built aircraft around the world in the late 1960s, the State Department and Defense Department decided that a more capable aircraft was needed for the MAP role. The International Advanced Fighter, later the International Fighter Aircraft Competition, was launched in early 1970. Now, other companies were pitching ideas. McDonnell Douglas had a lightweight stripped-down F-4 Phantom II. Ling Temco Vought pushed a stripped-down F-8 Crusader variant. Northrop pitched a variant on the F-5A. So Northrop's bid was an enlarged F-5 with uprated 5,000-pound static thrust J-85 GE-21 engines. The original J-85 was about 3,500 pounds thrust in static or in wet, which was afterburner. The new Tiger F-5E Tiger II was now 48 feet 2 inches long, but 51 feet for the F-5F. And the overall span was now 26 feet 8 inches, and more importantly, the wing area was now 186 square feet. Northrop continued other F-5 options concurrently with F-5 E&F development, including, once again, using a bigger wing. In 1970, the F-5 big wing utilized the standard J-85 engine with a 300 square foot wing. By 1974, a two-pronged approach saw the F-5 program office working on upgrading twin-engine designs, while advanced design started development work on single-engine variants. The various internal designations for these efforts included F-5X, F-5Y, and F-5Z. Some of the programs or designs that came out, the F-5J97 in 1974 featured two versions, one with a 240 square foot wing or a 300 square foot wing. That had a pair of GE J79s of 8,000 pounds wet thrust, and a pair, it also looked at were aircraft with Teledyne Continental CAE 455G-10 engines. So there were a lot of study proposals going on using various engines to get more power, to upgrade the airplane, and to put a bigger wing on it. Well, this was all from the F-5 program office. In the meantime, Advanced Design was evaluating the GE J101, which was a 15,000 pound class engine that was used in the YF-17. The J101 evolved into the F404, which is now in the early F-18s. So that design became known as the F5/404. These designs were essentially engine change only or eco configurations. By 1975, Soviet development of new fourth generation fighters to match US F-14 and F-15 aircraft accelerated Northrop's efforts to design a more capable vehicle for foreign military sales. So in 1977, Northrop chose Advanced Design's F-5G Eco. That was to be the official follow-on to the F-5 ENF Tiger II, still with a 186 square foot wing. This program, however, was put on the back burner due to changes in US foreign policy. For those of you that were listening to the film, Paul mentioned that briefly, but this is what happened. The first years of the 1970s saw the Watergate hearings, which led to the resignation of President Richard Nixon in August 1974, the evacuation of Saigon and the end of the Vietnam War in April 1975, and the foreign bribery scandals in 1975 and 1976 that implicated over 400 US corporations, many of them in the defense industry. This led to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of 1977. Part of the response of the American public to these events was to elect Jimmy Carter as the 39th President of the United States in November of 1976. Now, Carter believed that massive arms sales to foreign nations was destabilizing to international peace, especially with the US being the largest arms dealer in the world at that time, accounting for 50% of the sales. Carter decided to limit American sales to retain the moral high ground in foreign affairs. This led to tighter rules surrounding FMS, restricting it to established treaty nations such as NATO, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. Notice that the F5 FMS nations are not on the list. As a result, there was a hiatus on F5G development. Now, not surprisingly, the quest for weapons by other nations continued unabated, with France, the United Kingdom, Sweden, Israel, China, and the Soviet Union filling the breach. Realizing that the United States was losing near and long-term strategic influence in the Third World, Carter revised his policy in late 1977, calling for a new export fighter with capabilities between an F-5E and an F-16A. This new FX request allowed work to resume on the F-5G, but without government funding. Northrop was to pay all costs associated with the development, manufacturing, and sales of the airplane. Carter also ordered an FX competition to those foreign military sales, and there would be no clear winner. In other words, you wouldn't pick one and present that to the Allies. You would have both examples, and whoever wanted either one or both could pick it. So you had one from column A, maybe two from column B. General Dynamics responded with the F-16/79, which is powered by a GE J79 engine that produced 30% less thrust than its normal Pratt & Whitney F100 turbofan. So now you got two competitors. This new FX policy was itself disrupted by the granting or by the sale of frontline F-16As to Egypt and F-15s to Saudi Arabia as part of the 1978 Camp David Accords. This is the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. So all the FX proposals, that wasn't what they were going to get. They were going to get frontline American fighters. Ronald Reagan's election to President of the United States in November 1980 gave Northrop the hope that Carter's policies would be revised in favor of the F-5G, especially since Thomas V. Jones, who was the CEO of Northrop at the time, was part of Reagan's kitchen cabinet. Great hopes. Although the Reagan administration did indeed greatly increase foreign military sales, the details of that increase stunned Northrop, because South Korea, Venezuela, and Pakistan were offered frontline F-16s. And this was in December 1981. They were offered frontline F-16s and not either of the FX competitors. By the way, the Tigershark the F-5G was named the Tigershark in November of that year, just before this fell out. So now we have an F-5G Tigershark. Well, it soon became clear that third world allies expected, as a matter of national prestige, to receive the same equipment that the US military flew. The most serious setback was on 17 August 1982, when a memorandum of understanding was signed with the People's Republic of China that forbade the sale of F-5Gs to Taiwan or the Republic of China. Northrop viewed Taiwan as the launch customer for the F-5G because it had enough probable unit sales, a minimum of 300, to guarantee a production start. So there they were. F-16s being offered to everybody, and Taiwan, their biggest customer, cut off at the knees. So what was Northrop left to do? They had a choice. They could cancel the F-5G or upgrade it to compete head-to-head with the F-16. Tom Jones, having gambled twice and won on the F-5A and B Freedom Fighter and the F-5E and F Tiger II, rolled the dice once again in support of the new airplane. Later in August 1982, Northrop's Program Directive 27 dropped the F-5G designation, with Tigershark now being the only official name for the program. Northrop then petitioned the Air Force for a new designation to highlight that the Tigershark was not a mere F-5 derivative, but a new system equivalent to the F-16A and B. First flight of the Tigershark occurred on 30 August 1982 from Edwards Air Force Base with Russ Scott at the controls. The only designation was Tigershark on the nose, and it flew with a short nose pitot tube instead of a normal flight test boom. The shot on the left is Tigershark 1 landing after making first flight. The image on the right shows the extended nose test boom that was used on early flight tests after the first flight. Northrop wanted a designation that showed the Tigershark to be a new fighter for a new decade. As such, they requested skipping F-19 in favor of F-20, ostensibly to make the fighter an even number to differentiate it from the odd-numbered threat aircraft like MiG-19, MiG-21, MiG-23. Northrop, however, hedged their bets. They photographed the Tigershark with both F-20 and F-21 markings, as you can see there. The Tigershark became the F-20A on 17 November 1982. F-21A eventually went to the Israeli aircraft industry's Kfir C-1, which was used as an adversary aircraft for the US Navy and Marines. The passed over F-19 designation would cause great confusion and generate many myths for years to come. Technically, the first Tigershark was an F-5 Eco, then F-5G, and then F-5G-1 before becoming an F-20A. The internal Northrop construction number was GG-1001. It also carried a U.S. Air Force serial number, 82-0062, and later a civil registration number, N4416T. The civil registration was required as the Air Force soon ordered the removal of the Air Force serial number and national insignia, and we did many models in the shop with both. And so we removed the insignia because the F-20 was officially a private venture without government support, so do away with the official markings. Because Tigershark 1 was nearing first flight when Northrop made the decision to pursue the more aggressive path of challenging the F-16 directly, it was completed as originally planned. Since the F-20 was based on the known T-38 F-5 family and the GE F-404 engine was also a known quantity, flight test demo envelope expansion proceeded rapidly, as Northrop needed to use the aircraft for customer flights as soon as possible to sell the airplane. Flight tests proceeded quickly, with Tigershark 1 completing the remaining envelope expansion test points between customer demo flights. The first foreign pilot flights were scheduled in January 1983, just months after first flight. By the end of the year, 41 pilots from 19 nations flew in Tigershark 1. Primary visual identification features are the shark nose and the F-5 style canopy, and you can see on the drawing the differentiation between the Tigershark designs. And you can also see the shark nose in that front quarter angle. The second Tigershark started out as an F-5G-2 before becoming an F-20A. Tigershark serial, the Northrop construction number was GI-1001. The Air Force serial number was 82-0063, and the civil registration was N3986B. The Air Force serial was on the airplane prior to first flight, but was ordered removed by the Air Force. First flight was from Palmdale on 26 August 1983, and it was flown by Darrell Cornell. Tigersharks 2 and 3 had the first F-20 digital cockpit iterations. Tigershark 2 was used to introduce customer pilots to the F-20 glass cockpit. Note the differences in the noses and the panoramic canopy of the later F-20s. I'm going to take a swig. Tigershark 3 was an F-20A, Northrop construction number GI-1002, with a civil registration of N44671. Air Force serial 82-0064 was reserved for the airplane, but not applied per Air Force order. First flight was on 12 May 1984 in the new BMW Ascot gray color. Mrs. Tom Jones picked the scheme based on the color of their car. Why not? Tigershark 3 was the dedicated radar and sensor performance flight test aircraft, although it did do customer demo flights as well. Tigersharks 2 and 3 were originally outfitted with the GE AN/APG-67V X-band digital pulse Doppler multimode radar, what a mouthful, with air-to-air and air-to-ground capabilities. Range in air-to-air mode was between 44 and 56 nautical miles. Tigershark 3 was retrofitted with a bigger radome. You can see the big nose version on the photo on the lower right. I think I shot that one, yeah. It was called the ANAPG 67V ERR, Extended Range Radar, which had a 30 to 50% increase in range depending on the mode. By May 1985, 22 pilots from 9 countries flew demos in Tigershark 2 and 3, with a total of 66 pilots from 20 countries flying 154 demo flights in 3 aircraft. Now, the F-20 image flying over the Sierra Nevadas, that's a special one for Paul. He wanted it on the cover, but we decided to go with the more dynamic vertical flight by Tokunaga. The reason Paul loves this image is that he's flying it. If you look closely, you can see his blue helmet, flight helmet in there, and so we put it on the back cover. Tigershark 4 was never completed, but was designated F-20A with a Northrop construction number of GI 1003. Air Force serial number was 82-0065, and it was reserved for the airplane but not applied per Air Force order. No civil registration was assigned before the aircraft was scrapped. This was to be the initial production version with the big nose and the big, quote marks, big 200 square foot wing. Tigershark 4 was about 25% manufactured, but none of the major subsections were yet joined. The vertical tail and aft fuselage are in the assembly jig in the center photo, and the intermediate fuselage section, as seen on the right, is incomplete. Assembly was moved from the Production Design Center in Hawthorne to the West Complex in El Segundo as the YF-23 took over much of the floor space in the PDC. This chart, done by Craig Casson, has Craig showed up yet? Nope, don't see him. This chart offers a comprehensive breakdown of the differences between the 4 Tigersharks. This is in the book, so if you want to know further study, go buy the book. That was a shameless plug, yes. A single-seat reconnaissance version was planned with palletized nose payloads like those used on the RF-5E Tiger Eye. Note the stowed refueling probe forward of the windscreen. You can see that on the photo or the drawing on the left. Note also the option for a forward-looking camera or an ANAPG 67 radar in the nose. So it's going to be a fully equipped bird. 2-seat trainer and reconnaissance versions were planned as well. Initially designated as F5H, the design of the 2-seat canopy eventually led to the bulge configuration rather than the flattish F5F-like shape. Now, for those of you who are modelers, note that the Freedom Model F-20B kit features the F5F style canopy and not the bulged F-20B design. 5 options were considered before settling on the better tailored, albeit more expensive solution. Main drivers were fitting the F-20 avionics into the space and keeping the total aircraft length equal to or below the F-5F's 51 feet for aerodynamic stability reasons. The final design beat that goal by several inches. 2-seat reconnaissance versions were proposed as well, with one all-weather iteration featuring a large canoe fairing under the fuselage. You can see that in the photo on the right, and it was a big honking canoe. Upgrades to the design were contemplated as far back as the baseline F5G2, which was the second F-20. Chief among those concerns, and also the first one to be designed to compete with the F-16. Chief among those concerns was the perennial question of a bigger wing. Starting with the proposed single-seat F-5J and 2-seat F-5K, the wing grew to 240 square feet, with an increase in fuel from 4,400 pounds to 5,000 pounds, and using an 18,000-pound static thrust F404 engine. The follow-on single-seat F5L and the 2-seat F5M featured 6,200 pounds of fuel and a 19,000-pound static thrust F404. So, when the F5G became the F-20A, the F5H became the F-20B, and so on down the line. F-5J, F-20C, F-5K, F-20D, F-5L, F-20E, and F-5M, F-20F. Now, with the increased wing and fuel load, the F-20E would exceed the range and turn performance of the F-16. The company, however, hesitated in pursuing these changes. Costs on the program were mounted. Remember, this was company financed. There was no government support. No sales were forthcoming, except for 4 from Bahrain. Modifications to the fuselage and the redesign and recertification of the big wing would take time and money. An additional fear was that prospective buyers would wait for the improved models and reduce potential sales of the F-20A. So they were kind of stuck. Okay, this graph shows the wing area growth from the T-38A 170 square foot wing to the proposed F-20C 240 square foot wing, with a look at the largest wing studied for upgraded F-20s, a 321.1 square foot wing, approaching the clipped diamond wing shape of the YF-23, which is sort of an interesting point there. The F-20A 186 square foot wing suffered from high wing loading, which produced greater induced drag during low-speed maneuvering at high angle of attack. This caused greater use of the F-404 to negate that drag, which offset its higher thrust-to-weight ratio advantages. The 240 wing was deemed the optimum size for high supersonic speeds and subsonic maneuverability, and all the test pilots wished they had it. Is that right, Roy? Okay. The F-5G, F-20 spawned several proposals using modified Tigershark parts or sections for testing or incorporation into different vehicles. These included early proposals for the Israeli aircraft industry's Laviv fighter, when AIA was searching for a US partner for the program. Lavi G1 used the F-20 fuselage and vertical. Lavi G2, which you can see in the drawing up on the upper left, Lavi G2 had the F-forward fuselage only. Incidentally, Israeli aircraft industries eventually went with Grumman and their composite wing as their American partner. Northrop eventually protested the collaboration, saying it was an unwarranted competitor to the F-20. Of course, AIA disagreed, and as it turned out, neither company sold any airplanes. Northrop then proposed using the F-20 forward fuselage for various study programs, or demos, such as the Supersonic Survivable Fighter Technology Demonstrator. This particular design on the upper right had a scaled N360 wing and aft fuselage design. Also looked at was the SCAMP, or Supersonic Cruise and Maneuver Program, which was also investigated by General Dynamics, which led to the F-16XL. Northrop also pitched the F-5G forward fuselage for Grumman's forward swept wing proposal, which became the X-29. Grumman, however, went with the F-5A forward fuselage. Faced with a lack of government support for the FX in general and the F-20 in particular, Northrop decided on an aggressive sales push to allied and non-aligned nations. Beginning with the 1984 Farnborough Air Show in England, where Northrop Chief Test Pilot Darrell Cornell put on a stunning aerial display, Tigersharks 1 and 2, accompanied by 2 company Gulfstream G2s, embarked on a world tour to circumnavigate the globe while demoing the aircraft. The tour covered 31,451 miles while visiting 38 countries. It lasted from 17 August to 26 October 1984. The tour was going well, but on the last scheduled demo stop at Suwon Air Base in South Korea on 10 October, Tigershark 1 crashed at the end of a 9G spiral climb and rollout in preparation for landing, killing Chief Test Pilot Darrell Cornell. On 14 May 1985, Tigershark 2 crashed at Goose Bay, Labrador, Canada, during an afternoon show routine practice flight while in transit to the Paris Air Show in France. Pilot Dave Barnes was killed in the accident. The center graph shows the last couple of maneuvers of the F-20 show routine. Note how the airplane is supposed to level off after the 9G spiral climb and Immelman turn in preparation for landing. Both accidents occurred just after the 9G spiral climb. In both cases, the pilots leveled off inverted instead of right side up. Now, incidentally, Paul Metz experienced a loss of visual orientation during an F-20 practice session in Palmdale in 1985 at the same point in the demo program. He related his experience to a group of researchers in a presentation on high-G flight in 2001. Based on his experiences and the data from the two F-20 crashes, as well as other accidents, what likely affected all the pilots was nystagmus, a rapid flickering of the eyes indicating disorientation. The condition is now called G-lose, or gravity-induced loss of orientation, as opposed to G-lock, which is loss of consciousness. In both F-20 crashes, the sky and ground were close in color and contrast. The pilots did not lose consciousness, but they did lose orientation as to what was up or down. By the time they realized or reoriented, they were too low to recover. Now, this of course is a synopsis or abbreviated version. More of the story is in the book. Again, buy the book. Okay, needless to say, the accidents cast a pall over the program. But despite that, Northrop continued to press for sales. Notice the Antonov AN-2 in the upper left. Although Paul doesn't name names, I wrote an article on the Northrop-owned AN-2 and got cleared for public release, so I can say who the requester country is, even though Paul won't. It was South Korea. It was one of the biggest and best hopes for a Tigershark sale after Taiwan, and it would be large enough to kickstart production. Now, South Korea did express interest in the new aircraft, the F-20, but wanted assurance that it would be able to spot, track, and intercept the North Korean aircraft used to infiltrate commandos and spies into the South, specifically the Antonov AN-2. Northrop proved the F-20 could do that mission, but sales to South Korea never materialized despite co-production enticements, and there were many. We did a lot of proposals in the model shop to entice them, and they never bit. They did eventually buy F-16s. In 1983, Northrop entered the competition for a U.S. Navy supersonic adversary replacement aircraft. After a couple of years of studying, the Navy chose the F-16N in 1985, a bargain basement price version of the F-16 that underbid the F-20. Northrop also tried to get the U.S. Air Force aggressors to buy the F-20. The display model shop, ta-da, made several Tigershark models in various aggressor markings, but the Air Force went with F-16s. Are you detecting a pattern here? Northrop then pitched a 396-unit multi-year buy proposal to the Air Force in April 1985, with General Dynamics replying with a counter-proposal. The Air Force chose neither. The Air National Guard was also offered F-20s in April 1985, but the Air Force promised F-16s to the Guard, so that sale was stopped. Again, in April 1985, the Air Force released an RFI, a request for information, to industry for a new close air support battlefield interdiction aircraft to replace the A-10 Warthog. Where have we heard this before? Northrop's response was a very capably configured F-20. Despite the promising study results, the Air Force decided to convert several F-16s to test as A-16s, but the A-10 survived to become the legend that it is now known during the 1991 Gulf War. They will not be around much longer, I'm sad to say, but they had an illustrious career, the A-10. Northrop's final effort was in May 1986 to bid, a 1986 bid to the Air Force for an Air National Guard air defense fighter armed with AIM-9 Sidewinders and AIM-120 AMRAAMs, or Advanced Medium Range Air-to-Air Missiles. On 31 October 1986, the Air Force chose to retrofit F-16As and Bs with the AIM-120 capability, along with provisions for AIM-7 Sparrows, which the Tigershark already had. This proved to be the end of the line for the F-20. Despite all the efforts and all the controversies, on 17 November 1986, after $1.2 billion of the company's own money was spent, Tom Jones officially canceled the program. This was not quite the last of it, however. Repercussions from the program, especially concerning attempted sales to South Korea, lingered and led to forced retirements of some very senior executives. Their names would not be cleared until 1993. The F-20 itself refused to completely disappear, with some attempts to resurrect the design as an advanced trainer in the 1990s and early 2000s. But all such suggestions came to naught. For all intents and purposes, the Tigershark died on Halloween Eve, 1986. The F-20 was an outstanding airplane, yet it didn't sell. Why? Certainly, changes in U.S. foreign military sales policy played a large role. The F-5G lost 2 years to the Carter pause on arms sales. If development had progressed without the interruption, first flight would have occurred in late 1979 or 1980. Northrop may have generated enough sales to enter production, but, ironically, the airplane would not have been as good as the F-20. If the Memorandum of Understanding with the People's Republic of China was not signed in August 1982, Taiwan likely would have bought enough F-5Gs to start production. But again, the airplane would not have been as good as the F-20. If the F-20 had a 240 square foot wing early on, it may have sold, but there was not enough time or money to do so. Delaying a sales start on the F-20A risked the whole program in the face of other competition such as the F-16/79. The biggest reason, though, is the U.S. government's decision to sell allied and non-aligned nations frontline F-16 fighters. From then on, nobody wanted an American fighter unless it was used by the U.S. military. National prestige demanded it. Any attempts by Northrop to sell to the U.S. military to overcome that bias met stiff resistance from General Dynamics and the services themselves. A new airplane meant a new pilot training syllabus, new maintenance protocols, trained mechanics, and a new and different supply chain. More F-16s meant lower unit costs to the military, so that was the trade-off. In short, as Paul once told me, the biggest problem with the F-20 was that it wasn't called an F-16. It was a great fighter at the wrong time. This size and configuration graphic is in the book. It was done by Craig Casson. It gives you an overview of the relative sizes of the N-156 series up through F-20. I'll leave it there for a couple of seconds. For those confused by all of the changing designations, and you aren't alone, here is a handy chart laying it all out. It is also in the book. Tigershark 3 now hangs in the foyer of the California Science Center in Exposition Park near USC. It is missing the afterburner exhaust nozzle, hopefully for not much longer, as there's been a concerted effort to find afterburner cans, and Ron Gibb has provided the Science Center with a protocol on how to change it without dropping it from the ceiling. So hopefully in another year or two, once they get all of their other ducks in a row, we'll have an afterburner can on the F-20. So anyway, thank you for your time and attention. I'll be happy to answer some questions if you have times, and I do want to bring up Roy Martin to tell a couple of stories. So thank you. What was the driver behind the repeated effort to grow the wing size? The wing loading would affect maneuverability. And get an engineer up here to talk about it better than I. But the idea is that because the F-5, the N-156 grew in size and got more powerful engines, yes, it could do the maneuvers, but the smaller wing inhibited the type of maneuvers it could do. It could not be as maneuverable as a bigger wing version. I just looked it up before we were talking just to get an idea of what the F-16 wing is, and I think it's about 300 square feet was the F-16 wing. That was also a compromise too, because the original YF-16 had a smaller wing. And I remember reading that the godfather of the lightweight fighter mafia, John Boyd, was absolutely pissed off, sorry, pardon my French, at the F-16 program office when they grew the wing on the production F-16. He wanted that smaller wing size because he felt that was more maneuverable, but they eventually wound up with a 300 square foot wing. The F-20 would have, if they had been able to do it, would have gone to a 240 square foot wing, which would have increased the fuselage length and everything, would have increased the fuel size, would have given them a much more maneuverable platform at subsonic and then supersonic speeds, so they could do that maneuverability much better than it could on the F-5E. Is that good enough, Roy? Sure, come up and elaborate. Sure. Come up here, come up here.
So the subject is the efforts to justify a bigger wing on the F-5 and then later on the F-20. And Joe Bly was the manager of performance on the F-5, T-38 before that, and on the F-20. And one time before the F-20 happened, the other reason other than maneuverability and induced drag, because I remember being in the backseat of the F-5F, and we could outturn the F-20 at 200 knots, which is ridiculous. But it was induced drag, which is much more powerful than all the, you could put 3 F-404s in and not fix that problem. But Joe felt so strongly about the air-to-ground mission for the F-5, and a bigger wing would have allowed 2 more underwing store stations. And that was a big advantage that the F-16 had over us, and now the Saab Gripen has over the F-5. But Joe felt so strongly about it, he had the model shop build an F-5 with a 240 square foot wing with all 6 underwing store stations, not counting the center line. And at the conclusion of one of the management club's dinners at the Proud Bird, Welco is leaving in his green Jaguar, and Joe Bly stands in front of him with the headlights shining on him, and he's got this model that he wants to show Welco Gassett, so Welco would hopefully champion the bigger wing.
I think we have a picture of that model in the book too. Yeah. Yes. Okay, the speaker was Andy Scow, who was the chief aerodynamicist on the F-20. Aerodynamics and propulsion. Roy, did you have a couple of things?
Well, we're talking wing size.
Let's get a real test pilot up here to talk about wing size.
Yeah. So to answer the question from a pilot's perspective, if you will, so the F-5, a 15,500 pound airplane with a 186 square foot wing, is just about optimum. But with the F-20, we were at 18,000 pounds of aircraft, still using the 186 square foot wing. Andy Scow did the best he could to modify the leading edge extensions and all elements of that wing to try to get as much lift as he could for us. But when you loaded the airplane up in angle of attack, it had an early onset of a buffet, which meant you were getting into the induced drag part of the airplane. And we also had a characteristic at a certain angle of attack region there when you were tracking another airplane. We induced a little self-induced lateral directional oscillation that was just a part of the aerodynamics. Andy was working it, but this 186 square foot wing was giving us fits. And one of them was this thing we called LDO. Now, when we brought the foreign pilots in, we told them, hey, we're working this issue, but we'll show you, we'll do a tracking exercise, and we'll increase the angle of attack till we hit this little region. It's only like a couple of degrees angle of attack, where the airplane went into this lateral directional oscillation. Very bounded, very small, but enough to disrupt your tracking. So we called it LDO. Now, it's kind of a funny story, because one of the foreign pilots came in, and we showed him all this, and then after he flew the F-20, he was then invited by General Dynamics to come at Edwards Air Force Base to fly the F-16. So on the very first night of this foreign pilot's arrival, they had a party for him at GD did, and he was sitting next to a marketing guy for General Dynamics, and the foreign pilot made this comment, so do you have LDO in the F-16? And the marketing guy says, you know what, if they got it in the F-20, we'll get it for you. Back to you.
Sure. I think so. There we go.
The way the LDO was discovered in the F-20 is we're having a competition to see which pilot would fly the upcoming Paris Air Show demo. So Daryl Cornell, my group designed the profiles. Daryl flew it and Russ. And Andy Titteriga and Carl Weil and I were at Palmdale watching this to vote on which pilot did a better job. And at one point the airplane was flying an oblique slicing turn back, presenting the rear end right to us, and it was in this, it did this. And Titteriga and Weil and I, we go, what the heck was that? Because it was 14, 15 degrees angle of attack, way lower than we would have expected it. So a Tiger team gets formed to fix this, right? Before the Paris Air Show. And Joe Gallagher was the VP of engineering, and his first contribution was he declared that we not call it wing rock. He invented lateral directional oscillation because it didn't sound so bad. So we fixed it. My contribution was aerodynamic. We put, they call them now trailing edge or wingtip extensions. If you notice between the launcher rail and the outboard extent of the wing on the F-20 in that picture that Rat Johnson is flying it, by the way, good buddy of Roy's and mine. Those Lexus were generating vortices that would convect aft over the wingtip, attach the flow that was otherwise separated, and that fixed LDO 80%. The other 20%, it probably would have been more like 80% if it had been the only thing, we added the roll axis to the flight control system. At the time it was pitch and yaw only, and there were a lot of advantages to having the roll axis. You know, you could have an autopilot, for instance. But the actuators that had to support an active, digitally controlled roll axis wouldn't fit inside the tiny wing. Because when the airplane got heavier, the wing had to get stronger, but it couldn't get thicker by design. So the wing skins got thicker, so there was less area inside the wing. And so they had to put, every time I look at that picture, I look at those big bumps on the wing, and it kind of brings a tear. So the other story about small wing.
Did I? Yeah. I'm going to bring Ron Gibb up because he told me before the program that there was something that may have been overlooked.
I have just additional historical item. I was responsible for systems design on the F-20 on everything except avionics, which included all mechanical propulsion, and I had propulsion in the cockpit and all the equipment. And when Carter made his statement that we aren't going to be the arms merchant of the world, He also put a caveat in there that said, you, aerospace industry, will have to go out on your own if you want to sell something overseas. Well, at that time, Northrop had an input from Saudi that said, you know, we really like the aircraft, and it's something we've been able to support, which we never could do before. But if we just had a little more thrust, it would really make a big difference. And so there was a strong input, was if you change the engine, Saudi would buy it. And so the F-5G became, the idea in concept was an engine-only change that would be a development cost low enough so you could get it by with one customer. The problem with Carter's statement, go do it yourself, is there is a little government requirement called International Traffic and Arms Regulation, which is ITAR. And in order to sell anything overseas, you had to have a contract that was approved by all three services and by the Department of Defense. And that contract that was established by the government says you cannot charge anything to a customer that you spend before the contract is signed. So that meant that if you try to develop the program like a commercial program, where you make your big investment to do the development, and then you amortize the cost of that over a fixed number of aircraft to recover that, then you could plan yourself and financially you'd be stable. And that couldn't happen. I spent 2 years supporting the effort to get the government to change their ASPR regulations. And we had two major programs. We had the single engine, we had an engine replacement program on the F-5 and for Saudi, and we had an RF-5E that was fixing all the problems that the Air Force had with the RF-4 in Vietnam. And the minute those ASPR deviations were changed in 1979, Northrop kicked off both programs. They funded the RF-5E program and they funded the F-5G program. If they had been able to start that 2 years before, in 1977, they would have been in flight. They probably would have had a sale to Saudi, and they would be going down the road to be the F-5G as a replacement for the F-5Es all over the world. So that's my opinion, but that delay at the start got you into the Reagan decision to give them the F-16. If they had the contract with Saudi before that, Northrop could have pursued everything separately. So, my own personal concept.
Any other questions?
Can I talk to that picture?
Sure.
So Paul Metz has his favorite picture, and I have my favorite picture. So mine is that vertical shot of the F-20. And why is that my favorite picture? Because I'm flying the airplane that's taking that picture. So how do we do that? How do you get a picture like that is the question. So this little Japanese photographer arrives, and he wants to do a story on the F-20 for a Japanese magazine. So he speaks pretty good English, but it was still pretty broken. So I briefed, what kind of pictures you want? He says, I want two pictures. One, I want looking straight down on the airplane with Edwards Air Force Base in the background looking through the cockpit. That's interesting. And then I want a straight up shot looking right at the top of the plane. Okay, so Chuck and I talk about it. I said, okay, Chuck, you stabilize and I'll go ahead and do a big barrel roll around and this guy will have a camera. Well, he shows up with this camera, it's got a little short lens on it. It's not telephoto. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a hard day. Because first time I do the barrel roll around him, I hear him go click, 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 and I recover. And he says, get closer. Okay, so pull it in a little tighter, try to do a tighter barrel roll around. I hear click, 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 and then I promptly scared myself to death. And I said, okay, enough of that. Let's go to the vertical shot. So the way we brief the vertical shot is let's get down over the Owens Valley with the Sierras in the background. And when we all get stabilized, then Chuck, let's say you're ready, and we'll be about 500 knots here. And let's start the pull, like a 3G pull right to the vertical. Chuck, you call when ready. The photographer in the back will have his camera up. You call ready. Chuck's going to do a roll, and the camera's going to go click, 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 and somewhere in there is going to be that perfect frame, okay? So I set up here, we're getting ready to do it, and the guy in the back said, get closer. Okay, so pull it in, fairly tight on Chuck, and said, okay, Chuck says, I'm ready. I said, okay, let's start the pull. And we start the pull up, And Chuck says, ready. And I'm waiting for the photographer to say that he's ready with his camera up, but I don't hear anything. And we wait, and I don't hear anything. And I see my airspeed going down. So I said, Chuck, roll. And Chuck does this perfect unloaded vertical roll. And in the back, I hear click, 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 click. So I know we're getting the shot. However, at this point, what do? I'm out of knots. Chuck still got excess thrust. He's in the F-20, so he does this beautiful recovery. Me, I flop over. I ended up in perfect chase position. Better to be lucky than good. That picture then ended up on a Japanese a magazine, and Northrop liked the picture so much they bought the rights to the picture, and that's the story on how we got the vertical shot.
I want to keep you up here for a minute, Roy. I want you to tell the Chuck Yeager story.
Oh, you want the Chuck Yeager story? I want the Chuck Yeager. All right. Well, the F-20 actually has Chuck Yeager involved in the story. So it goes like this. I'm pretty new hire into Northrop, and the program has just started, and we were all working in the simulator, working with the development of the flight test. And the other test pilots on the program were all sent off to go fly F-5s to other foreign countries on a delivery flight. So I'm left as the chase pilot for the F-20 for Darrell and Russ. One day they said, hey, Roy, take the Beach Bear and go up to Grass Valley, California, and pick up Chuck Yeager, because Chuck Yeager is going to come and fly the F-20, and hopefully we'll get his endorsement to help us sell it. Okay? So I fly up, pick up General Yeager on the way back. Great conversation. He's an old farm boy from West Virginia, and I'm a farm boy from the Ozarks of Missouri. So right away we got something in common. You know, we both got accents and farm boy backgrounds. Anyway, so we land, and then we briefed him up on the F-20. But initially they told me go fly him in the F-5F, Chuck in the front, I'll be in the back as the instructor pilot, and make sure that General Yeager is happy with his flying skills because he hadn't flown for a while, and then we'll put him in the F-20. Okay, all good, which was a single seat plane. So I'm up with him on the two-seat F-5F model that Northrop actually purchased this airplane to be the chase. That was a part of the, I think we paid $6 million for the airplane, something. Sold it for $14 million to Singapore later. Anyway, so Chuck comes back, put him in the F-5F, he's in the front seat. We take off, we go over the Sierras. He's pointing out fishing places where he used to catch good fish. We go up to the north part over the White Mountains, and he points out a salt lake where they used to actually bring salt across the Owens River, believe it or not, on barges. And anyway, we come back to the pattern, and I figure, okay, General Yeager's going to do several landings. And we still got about 30 minutes of fuel, so fuel's no problem. Okay, so we come in to call that we're going to do a straight in. And Tower tells us, hey, do an orbit because we have an AV-8B doing simulated flame outs to the runway. We don't want to interfere with him. Okay, so we do our orbit. We start back in. General Yeager calls, we're Tiger 66 inbound. And they, as they're coming in, they said, Tiger 66, be prepared to go around. Anyway, we continue on. As we're getting closer to the end of the runway, Tower comes back and says, Tiger 66, go around. You have an aircraft on the runway. General Yeager comes back and says, we're not going to go around, we're going to land. Oh, you're the IP in the back. What would you do? Are you going to take the airplane away from Chuck Yeager? Okay. So I look up and I see that there's the AV-8 has cleared the runway. So it's not a factor. The runway's actually clear. So we land. And no touch and go, we just land. I know, when they told back, Tiger 66, go around, General Yeager says, we don't have enough fuel to go around, I'm landing. So that's a part of the story that's kind of important there. Anyway, so we land. Soon as we land and clear the runway, Tower comes with, Tiger 66, give me a call when you get in. So I know what this means, my future's on the line here, for landing on a runway that was not supposed to be landed upon according to Tower. So as we go and park, and of course there's a lot of press, people wanting to talk to General Yeager right away as he comes out of the plane. And I run over and grab a bunch of pictures of the F-20 and come back and said, hey Chuck, scratch your signature on these right quick. And he does. And I jump in the car and I drive to Tower. And I climb up the Edwards Tower, go in, and they said, hey, who are you? I said, I was the pilot on Tiger 66. Oh, what were you thinking? We told you to go around. You know, what are you thinking? And I said, but I was flying with Chuck Yeager. Oh, and he wants you to have these pictures. Oh, Chuck Yeager, isn't he wonderful? What a great guy, world's greatest pilot. So let's just say I got out of trouble that day, I thought, you know. A little bit more to the story. So the airplane that had cleared the runway, a guy named Jet Jackson from McDonnell Douglas, was flying the AV-8B. So about 3 months later, I'm over at McDonnell Douglas talking to them about some stuff, and Jet Jackson comes in. He says, so hey, how much gas did you have that day? I said, what day? He said, the day that General Yeager said he didn't have enough gas to go around. Oh, I said, we had about a half an hour's fuel. Half an hour? He said, you know, the word went up to Sandy McDonald, the CEO of McDonnell Douglas, that he, Jet, had almost caused Chuck Yeager to have to bail out. And he said, I came that close to being fired. Anyway.
Yeah, I love that story. I thought you'd all enjoy it too. So, anyway, any other questions? Well, on that note, I don't think we're going to be able to top it, so thank you very much.